Good afternoon and welcome to the Fintech Hub session. So across the week, we will be hearing from Fintech hubs across the world, and today we are starting with the home country of Canada. So it's given me my pleasure to welcome our panel. So first of all, we have Christine.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Duhaime. I'm the founder of the Digital Finance Institute, and we're based in Vancouver, and it's my pleasure to be here today.
Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Hindle, the Managing Director of Fintech at Mars in Toronto.
Pat?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pat Chacos. I'm Chief of the OSC Launchpad, and I'm a little different than the rest of the panel in that we are a regulatory innovation hub. And
last but not least, Eric.
Hello, I'm Eric Lemieux, and I'm the head of the chairman of FinFusion in Montreal.
So the use of collaboration and partnerships are really important when it comes to building a fintech ecosystem. How have you been able to use collaboration and partnerships across your region to further the goals of the hub, and what are the strengths that have come out over the last few years?
So I think what people don't realize about Canada is, we are a vast country, and so that's a barrier in some ways, just geographically, for the centers to kind of get together and work on things. But I think what has been really amazing is, at least in terms of the three cities, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, we have gotten together and worked on projects and try to advance fintech for the whole country. And the reason why that's so important for all of us to work together is obviously we want to help our fintech scale and make connections with international markets. So what we try to do is make the connections internationally and then work with our partners in Canada as well, so we can all help develop our ecosystem.
And so one thing that was key for the London ecosystem, which is where I'm from and growing, was a mix of public, private, and government working together to actually allow the ecosystem to move forward. So if it's possible, it would be great to have some examples of where academia, government, and regulators have done things to support the ecosystem.
So one of the things we actually did early on is we had been hearing that one of the key areas where startups are really looking for is funding, and how do you increase some of the what was traditionally venture cap funding for Canadian startups. So one of the things we did when we started Launchpad was actually we brought in AngelList to Canada. And they obviously are a US and UK, very global platform that's really focused on venture capital. So we wanted to give an opportunity for Canadian startups to obviously put their businesses on a platform when they're looking to raise capital, but at the same time we wanted Canadians to be part of that equation. So we actually we did bring them in, and we lightened some of the barriers for a time period, because I think it's important that we're hearing what are the challenges for fintechs here in Canada and how we can help in terms of that. But at the same time, they're a registered dealer, what we would call a registered dealer here in Canada, and at the same time there are investor protections, because there are people looking at this. If you've gone through a creative destruction lab or an X36, you've obviously, there's a business, people have looked at it, entrepreneurs have been involved, so we wanted Canadians to be part of that equation and investing in those companies.
So one of the other key things when it comes to developing a fintech ecosystem is about investment. So in London is still the capital of fintech investment in Europe. So it would be great to sort of get an understanding of the investment challenges here in Canada and in each of your respective cities, but also to understand how far you've come when it comes to the investment landscape in Canada.
I think what you raised is important in the UK, where the government got behind fintech really early on and helped develop it as an amazing fintech hub. And we were a little slow to get off the ground in Canada, to be honest with you, but now I think we've seen a much different perspective coming out of the federal government. Specifically, the Competition Bureau is about to release its study with respect to whether or not Canada's competitive and how that might be standing in the way of innovation, which I think we'll see changes coming from that in about a week or two. And again, we have some anti-money laundering laws that kind of stand in the way of innovation and onboarding quickly, and we're going to see some changes coming from that as well. So the federal government now is on track with being assistive for fintech, and I think we're going to see some changes coming down that will really help accelerate Canada as an ecosystem center.
And they've been very open to hearing from us and the ventures, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to add something on collaboration.
Yeah.
for a fintech to be successful, you don't have the choice to look globally. So it's not just the collaboration between your local ecosystem, but you have and you must look at a broader ecosystem, your country, but also internationally. And I believe the more successful fintech companies will be the ones who are able to build those links. And I hope then we are all working to help that. So it's very important to become a successful fintech.
How do I partner with a lot of these larger financial institutions, not just banks, could be insurance companies, mutual fund companies. So I do think that's something that we've been hearing in terms of how do we help enable the partnerships to happen. Certainly there have been some really good examples with the lending platforms with some of the larger banks, but how do you get your foot in the door? Because I think, from a startup's perspective, you may be spending a lot of time on that relationship, and that's a lot of time at a very urgent period of time in terms of, getting to market and needing, obviously, funding. So that's one of the things we're hearing in terms of challenges.
Christine?
We have a different, I don't know if it's a problem, but a different situation in Vancouver where it's a very wealthy city and people have an enormous amount of money and they support technology a lot and they're investing in a lot of startups. And if they don't, Silicon Valley is not very far away, so there's always a good source of funding. So I don't think funding is so much our issue here, but one of the things that Vancouver could benefit from is more connections to financial institutions to sell their products and get embedded with the banks in order to scale globally. So we don't really have so much of an investment issue in Vancouver, fortunately.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah. It's very amazing when you look at all the fintechs, all the talented people who are working together, and in Mars or District 3 or different incubators. But we have money for seed and help them to start. But to make them grow, I think we have to. Our culture is not. It's not yet. The people, the investors, they are. They are.
Risk adverse.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm talking maybe more from Montreal, and my colleague Jeff from Toronto will maybe say something different. But what I'm saying is more and more corporate investors, venture investors, they're becoming more and more aware, and they're saying then they will be able to invest more. But we are still at the beginning. In my mind, major number of our fintech, they are more the startup and at the seed level. The good news, they have all the support, they have the money. The next step is we'll be able to bring more capital to make them growth and make them growth internationally, just not locally.
With investment comes the challenges of finding the right talent to be in these companies. And so it would be great to allow the audience to understand a bit more about how the university sector is actually working with the fintech sector and what is happening in each of your respective cities. Eric, would you like to start?
Artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, I really believe it's going to have a huge impact on our industry. And I'm seeing a lot of link between those startups and the fintech and the people in AI. So this is something else which is, I think, I see that very positive for the future.
I will echo that. I think it's a very exciting time to be a young entrepreneur. I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be a young technology entrepreneur. A lot of universities have programs, whether they're official classes on blockchain or whether they're even just groups and meetups. They are participating in the ecosystem. They are encouraging young people to strike out and try their own thing and be inventive and fail fast. But don't be afraid, and it is, I think, an extremely exciting time to be an entrepreneur. I will point out as well, though, entrepreneurial efforts are for all ages. At Mars, many of our entrepreneurs are actually over 40. They are experienced people who've either coming out of universities or coming out of businesses, and they're beginning their second or their third career on their own. And that's also very exciting as well. So we're not just talking about two teenagers fighting over a pencil in a garage, as I once was. We're talking about some very experienced people using smarts to drive new business.
What are the biggest challenges that you are facing within your hub, and How do you think you're going to be able to overcome that? And what do you think will be a bit more tricky to overcome?
You remember, I'm back with my model, and the financial industry, I think that one of the challenges is make the startup be able to work with the financial industry. I believe this is, and when you're in a strong industry, sometimes you don't want to get disrupted by a fintech. So you understand that sometimes the alignment of both are not the same. But I think we start from big FI were not scared, but they didn't like that. After that, they've been looking, and now they see that as a tool to be able to innovate. And so they started to build relationship, but if they want to build real relationship, and not just, event with the startup, they still have some work to do. So this is, for me, this is one of the important challenge, is a link with the FI. The other one will be raising the money. It's still something that's going to be, it's always difficult. You see it, it's always difficult. But we don't have the same culture here in Canada than they have in San Francisco. So, but we're learning fast, and more people want to do that. Just an example, Blockstream is Montreal, has been founded in Montreal, but it's Montreal and San Francisco, because if you want to raise the money, it's sometimes very good also to have your office in San Francisco. So.
Great. Christine, the challenges?
Yeah, I'd have to say the law, and it's because fintechs are financial services, and obviously for them to scale and provide services across Canada as the world's moving to mobile banking, everything's going to have to be online, and we have anti-money laundering laws that are quite onerous, that make it difficult to onboard a person easily or inexpensively compared to the rest of the world. And I understand that Canada wants to preserve its financial system. We want to be safe. But at the same time, we're at a competitive disadvantage because our laws are quite onerous. So I think the law is one of them. And then, your Bank of England has a fintech license. And what they've said, and you probably know, is that they don't have a it's not zero fail. So they expect 15 to 20% of the new banks in the fintech license to fail. But if you were to say that to Canadian government, no way, no bank can fail in Canada. But I think if we just reverse the thought process and say, like you were saying, it's okay to fail. We learn from it. We get different companies that emerge that are probably greater and stronger and more innovative. But I think it's okay to fail and for us to embrace failure in financial services. But as I said, that's a cultural change that I think will come slowly in Canada.
Jeff?
I agree with everything that's been said so far. Certainly, more capital also requires more talent, and more talent requires more capital. So that can be a challenge. And regulatory change is another one. These are all three things that never happen fast enough, is what I will say. The thing that I'm looking for is the opportunity for Canadian entrepreneurs to really scale up outside of the Canadian environment. So be able to run their Canadian operations, delivering services into the United States, delivering services into Europe, into Asia, into Africa. I think that's what I'd really like to see. I don't want to see Canadian entrepreneurs, because of funding requirements, because of capital requirements, because of regulatory requirements, have to move head office from here to some other nation in order to advance their business. We've seen that just far too often, and I'd really like to see Canada be home permanently for many of these firms.
And I think too, like Ethereum is such a great example where we got some digital currency law and off they went kind of the next day type of thing because they didn't because they weren't equipped to cope with that. But meanwhile, Switzerland now has Crypto Valley that actually should be Canadian. So if we can't reverse the clock, but I think what we can do is get a centralized person in the federal government that says we're open for innovation. Come talk to us if you've got impediments and need to work things out and keep great companies here in fintech.
And last but not least, Pat, the challenges?
So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective. I hear the regulatory barriers a lot. What I would say to you is talk to who you need to talk to, whether it's your securities regulator or whatever regulator your business happens to be in. Because what I'm hearing is something a little bit different. I'm seeing people interested in this space, wanting to make it work, whether it is the new cryptocurrency offerings or the latest AI intelligence. We know this trend is coming. We know this tidal wave's coming. These are new businesses. We want them in Canada, and I think regulators are listening. I think how to fix it, I personally, I know certainly the people I've been working with want to understand it better. We've heard the AML, the KYC issue. We actually had a RegHack which was the first hackathon by a regulator in Canada. And one of the things we heard is the real need for, let's say, a know your client or digitized identity. How do we make that happen in Canada? So what I've actually heard is part of the challenge, and maybe it kind of picks up where Christine was talking about, is the need for open data. We know in the UK they've obviously got PSD2, and there are other initiatives I think that you've seen from other governments. I think for that to happen in Canada, we'll need a collaboration with federal and provincial governments. But in terms of what we're hearing, that's important for fintechs and for fintech models to grow in Canada.